By now, you've learned quite a lot about wildfires already, so kudos to you. Today, we're going to learn how plants tolerate fires. So by now you should already know that wildfires are very dependent on plants, right? So in a wildfire, the plants are the fuel, which is one of the 4 necessary drivers of a wildfire. And the appearance of the plant community will determine the outcome of the fire, right? So whether it's going to be a high intensity fire or a low intensity one, whether it spreads very far or not, and even how often it can burn. Now here's what you should know. Plants that live in fire-prone regions have lived with fire for millions of years. So the fact that many still exist is telling. So these plants have developed adaptations to survive under their local fire regime. And we can divide these adaptations into 2 major categories. Direct adaptations against fire and adaptations to post-fire conditions, so after the fire. So the main direct adaptation against the fire is the protection of important tissues, right? So this is expressed in various ways. Well, trees, for example, they protect important tissues in their stem by a thick woody bark. And there is actually a relationship between the thickness of the bark and the time it takes until a lethal temperature is reached. So the thicker the bark, the longer it will take for that lethal temperature to be reached. But also think of the location of these tissues as an adaptation, right? For example, roots are extremely important parts of a plant, and there's a good reason why they are underground. For one, they are well protected against the fire over there. That's not to say that the temperature in the soil won't increase during a fire, but in general, most heat energy is transferred upwards. And also, the soil slows the transfer of heat down by a lot. But the opposite is also a strategy. So very tall plants like eucalypts keep their buds and seeds all the way up in the canopy. Now, while the heat energy is mostly directed upwards, if you're simply so tall that the fire won't reach, then you'll probably be good. Unless it's a canopy fire, then that will be bad. And, don't forget, seeds are protective tissues themselves. I mean, they are meant to survive extreme conditions, so some seeds can survive temperatures of up to 90 degrees for 4 hours. Now, speaking of important and protective tissues, some plants actually have specialized structures from which they can resprout. Examples of this are so-called lignotubers, which are specialized roots, and epicormic buds. So, if important tissues do die in a fire, but these specialized structures survive, the plant can actually resprout from these. Most adaptations to post-fire conditions are essentially meant to increase the reproduction rate. So think of it like this, right? When a plant is damaged by a fire but it survives, it might go like, oh, there's danger, I might not make it, so I may as well make sure that there is enough offspring so at least they have a chance to survive. And one adaptation is that some plants start flowering strongly after a fire, right? And the flower turns into a fruit with seed, which can become another plant. So the goal is to increase reproduction, so there's a higher chance of survival after the fire. Another adaptation that serves a similar purpose is that plants start dropping their seed immediately after a fire. We call that seed dispersal. Right, it would be useless to keep them in the canopy and risk them getting scorched, so they drop in the hope that they can be dispersed by the wind, for example. And finally, seeds can be cued to fire. So in general, it takes specific conditions for seeds to germinate. Since these plants have lived with fire for millions of years, their seeds are actually adapted to germinate only after a wildfire. Based on what we've covered so far, we can make an important general distinction between fire-adapted plants, which will be very important to understand in the future. On one hand, we have the resprouters. So resprouters are able to survive a fire by their specialized structures, right? Like their lignotubers. So after a fire, they can just, resprout. So these plants usually have more direct adaptations against the fire. Obligate seeders, on the other hand, are usually killed by fire. However, their strategy is not to survive through a fire, but to exploit post-fire conditions. So, their adaptations usually include dropping seed immediately after a fire and sprouting up extensively after fire. So when I talked about Richmond, I only talked about the main roads that are heading from east to west. I didn't talk about the main roads that are heading from north to south. Now the middle one is called Church Street, and if you take Church Street all the way down south, you get to a suburb that's called South Yarra, which you'll be surprised to find out is south of the Yarra River. When you enter South Yarra from Church Street, the name of the street will turn into Chapel Street. Now, Chapel Street is a very familiar road among Melburnians. It's a sprawling centre for retail and for nightlife. If you ever go out on a Saturday night in Chapel Street, the pubs will be loaded with people and the streets packed with cars. So South Yarra is pretty well known for its many shopping malls and warehouses, and one of the most famous ones is called the Jam Factory, which used to be an old brewery back in the 1850s, but it's of course rebranded into a total shopping mall. South Yarra is one of the most livable suburbs of Melbourne, and there are two main roads to this suburb. One is Chapel Street and the other is Toorak Road, and right now I'm right on the intersection of both. If you go further east on Toorak Road, you'll enter the neighbouring suburb in the east, Toorak. But we are heading into the suburbs of South Yarra today. So if you're looking for more of a suburban retreat here in South Yarra, away from all the sprawling shopping malls and skyscrapers, you can take an east on Toorak Road, walk into the suburbs a bit until you find the Como House and, of course, the Como Gardens. Fun fact, the Como House and Gardens are actually named after a lake in Italy, the Como Lake. Finally, on the southern tip of South Yarra, we can find Prahran Market, which is named after the suburb down south, Prahran, which is right on the opposite side of the street. This time I'm going to report on one of the best weekends I've ever had. For some context, the week before has been nothing but terrible weather. On Thursday there was even a record rainfall. But on Friday, the 14th of October, I finished and handed in my research proposal and the weather took a great turn. It was time to celebrate with a great weekend. I woke up very early on the Saturday, ate a quick brekkie, biked my way to Richmond Station and waited for my train to arrive. So the reason I got up this early is because I'm headed to Cranbourne, which is to the southeast of the CBD. So somewhere on the outskirts of Melbourne. And I'm going to the Royal Botanic Gardens over there to do some birding and, of course, learn some things about plants. So I brought my bike here because here in Victoria you can do that. I brought binoculars and a camera, which I have in that bag. Got some reading material for myself, and I'll see you in Cranbourne. It took about an hour to reach Cranbourne by train, but it went by like a hurricane. Biking through Cranbourne to reach the gardens, my first impressions are that it's definitely more rural and much quieter than the city. But the centre is definitely what I'd call urbanized. I took this bike path towards the gardens. The path was shared by heaps of invasive rabbits, and I even got swooped by a magpie. Also, frogs. Anywho, a 30-minute ride later, here we are at Royal Botanic Gardens, Cranbourne. Opens at 9 AM, after which you're free to enter. So, do you remember the Friends of Burnley Gardens? Well, next to taking care of the Burnley Gardens, they also organize heaps of events for members and non-members. Today's event was a birding tour by Birdlife Australia and a garden tour by the Botanical Garden staff itself. Since I brought Sabine's camera, here's my adventure in pictures. Before the birding tour even started, I already added 2 species to my list, the superb fairy wren and the yellow-rumped thornbill. The section where we did the birding tour is absolutely gorgeous and variable. It's designed to host different ecosystems from bushy landscapes to mallee, which is sort of similar to the outback. Because of that, a large variety of birds. It was also a day of firsts. Along the roads within Cranbourne Gardens, I found 4 different wildlife crossing signs. One for wallabies, koalas, bandicoots, and snakes. And I found all but one. Can you guess which? The most common one of these is the wallaby. I've already seen many wallabies, and at Cranbourne I saw multiple. Look, I even did a photo shoot of this one as it noticed me. The other 2 were my first timers though. High up in the eucalyptus tree, I saw my very first koala. Never expected to find one here. I've always been told they were the more rare iconic animal of Australia, and that you need to go to specific places to find them. So I lucked out really hard. Whether you'd want to call the last one luck is up to you. But I also saw my first snake. Probably a tiger snake, but I'm no expert. Regardless, you don't want to take the risk to find out. Australia represents a good number of snakes that regularly make the list of top 10 most venomous in the world. So, if you see a snake in Australia, always keep your distance. So, that means, unfortunately, no bandicoots. Better luck next time. On Sunday, I went to the station early again, but instead of Cranbourne, I took the Sandringham line, all the way to Sandringham. I went with my friend Zoe, she's a PhD at my campus. We walked from Sandringham to Blackrock. Both are coastal suburbs of Melbourne, so it's basically a walk along the beach. But since Zoe's a hardcore birder, that's something we kept ourselves occupied with too. Anywho, here's what we really came for. We joined an excursion of the Field Naturalists Club of Victoria to find the flamboyant peacock spider. And it's supposed to be found on this rocky shoreline in Blackrock Beach. Here you might encounter the spider sunbathing on the scrubby leaves of these pink faces. It's really hard to look for something while having entirely no clue what you should be looking for. I've never seen a real life peacock spider before, but 20 minutes in, that was gonna change. One of the members found one, and I was surprised to find out how tiny it was. Like, really, really tiny. I was never gonna find it without knowing it was actually that small. The peacock spider is named after the vibrant colors that are only present in the male spiders. The females lack these colors, just like peacocks. Another similarity with them is that the courtship dance of the male spider involves raising the abdomen to show off their beautiful colors. Unfortunately, we did not see them do this. After finding a couple of these spiders, we headed off to Beaumaris, a neighbouring suburb. Supposedly, peacock spiders can be found there in Long Hollow Heathland Reserve. Well, we definitely found some spiders there. Whether they were peacock spiders though, we're not entirely sure. But, at least from today, I can say for sure that I have seen them. I've gotten a lot into sports lately. I've joined a Taekwondo club on the recommendation of my teacher Henke Groningen, as well as a yoga club at Burnley campus. Of course, I had to maintain my calisthenics as well. I decided to take a break from planche for a while. Not because I'm giving up on it, but just to build up some general strength. In principle, there's no real goal involved with the rings, other than building up strength. No matter what exercise you do in calisthenics, at the end of the day you're either pushing or pulling. So, my workout resume is basically a balance between pushing and pulling exercises, which I alternate. Usually I'd go with something like dips on the rings, then pull-ups, push-ups, rows, XY raises, triceps and biceps work, and of course, core. But there's always room for freedom. Some alternative exercises for pushing could be chest flies or archer push-ups, and for pulling these uneven pull-ups. Or something completely free-form like these reverse crank back levers I once saw someone do. Or a combination of pushing and pulling with ring muscle-ups. In short, variation is your friend. Thanks for watching. Your Australian words for the day are threefold, and they are not necessarily Aussie slangs. These words can actually be found in the English dictionary, but you'll just hear them way more over here in Australia than anywhere else in the world. First off, an Aussie doesn't think something, they reckon. So if you were to ask your colleague to meet at location X at 6 p.m, they may say, "I reckon that'll work." Second, an Aussie doesn't want something, they are keen. It's their way of saying that they're down for something or interested. So you might ask that colleague if they are keen to meet at location X at 6 p.m. And finally, an Aussie doesn't say that there's a lot of something, they say there's heaps. So if you need to cancel your reservation for whatever reason and there's still time left to do it, they might say, "No worries, there's heaps of time left." Again, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to learn more about wildfires and about Australia. Follow me on my socials and visit julzdownunder.com to read frequent blog posts. Also, if you like the music I used in this video, visit my SoundCloud at Julz Liquorpools. Looks like that's it. See ya!